All right, let's go. Number 14. The disc that was taken out of service. On the 4th of July, 1999, two men with metal detectors were working the Mittelberg, a wooded hill about 250 meters high in the Ziegelrode forest, in Saxony-Anhalt in central Germany. Henry Westphal and Mario Renner had no license to be there. They struck something with a pickaxe, broke a piece off it, and pulled out of the ground a bronze disc about 32 centimeters across, inlaid with gold. They sold it the next day for 31,000 marks. For the next 2.5 years, it moved through the antiquities trade, and by the time it surfaced in a hotel in Basel in February 2002, the asking price was 700,000. The buyer at the meeting was Harold Meller, the state archaeologist of Saxony-Anhalt, working with the Swiss police. What he recovered is the Nebra Sky Disc, and it is the oldest known depiction of the sky as a thing with structure. The bronze is now blue-green from corrosion. Originally, it was dark metal with gold laid into it, a large gold circle, a crescent, and 32 smaller gold dots. 7 of those dots sit in a tight cluster between the circle and the crescent, and nearly everyone who has looked at it reads that cluster as the Pleiades. The metal came from a long way off. The copper traces to the Eastern Alps, to the Salzburg region of Austria. The gold of the first phase matches natural gold from the River Carnon in Cornwall, at the other end of Europe. The detail that changes the object is that it was altered repeatedly over a long period. X-rays show 2 golden arcs added later at the left and right rims, each spanning 82 degrees. To make room, 1 star was moved and 2 were covered over. Wolfhard Schlosser, an astronomer at the Ruhr University in Bochum, pointed out that 82 degrees is the angle between midsummer and midwinter sunrise on the horizon at the latitude of that hill. Schlosser and Rolf Hansen of the Hamburg Planetarium went further, arguing that the crescent beside the Pleiades encodes a rule for when to insert a leap month, a rule with a close parallel in a Babylonian compendium called Mule Apin. That reading is argued, not proven. Amelia Pastor and Kurt Rosland published a rebuttal in Antiquity in 2007, pointing out that the gold dots are spread on an even grid rather than matching real star positions, that any actual map of that patch of sky would include Orion, and that there is no sighting device anywhere on the object. Their conclusion was that it is an emblem of the cosmos rather than an instrument. What happened at the end is not in dispute. Somebody removed the left arc entirely. Somebody punched roughly 40 small holes around the rim. Then the disc was buried on the hilltop with 2 ornamented swords, 2 axes, a chisel, and 2 arm rings, around 1600 BC. It sits now in a case in the State Museum in Halle, under glass, its gold still bright against the corrosion. It was made, modified, stripped of a piece, and put into the ground on a hill in Germany 36 centuries ago. Whatever rule it was built to hold, the last person who could read it took that with them. Number 13, Warren Field. The site is a field on a terrace above the River Dee, near Craiths in Aberdeenshire, in northeast Scotland. Nothing is visible from the ground. In the drought summer of 1976, aerial photography by the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Scotland recorded a line of dark marks in the crop, curving across the field for about 50 meters. Between 2004 and 2006, Hillary and Charles Murray excavated the alignment for the National Trust for Scotland. What they found was 12 pits in 3 arcing sections. The largest, near the middle, is more than 2 meters across and about 1.5 meters deep. The pits had been dug, allowed to silt up, and cut again and again over an extraordinary length of time. The earliest work belongs to around 8000 BC. The latest recuts are Neolithic, some 4,000 years later. 8000 BC in Scotland means hunter-gatherers. There was no farming, no pottery, no metal, and no permanent settlement anywhere in Britain, and no known formal calendar anywhere on Earth for another 5,000 years. These pits were dug by people who moved with the seasons and left almost nothing behind that lasts. In 2013, a team led by Vincent Gaffney, then at the University of Birmingham, published an analysis of the alignment in Internet archaeology. Their proposal is that the 12 pits represent 12 lunar months, with the varying shapes and sizes tracking the moon through waxing, full, and waning. 12 lunar months fall about 11 days short of a solar year, so any lunar count drifts. The arc, they argued, solves that. It points southeast to a notch in the hills at the Slug Road Pass, between Cairnmont Airn and Craigburg, where the midwinter sun rose 8,000 years before Christ. One sunrise a year, and the count resets. The problem is that almost every part of that reading depends on the others. The pits were not all open at once. They were dug and recut across centuries and millennia. So reading them as 12 simultaneous months assumes a synchrony the ground does not demonstrate. A 50-meter arc will point at something on the horizon. The match between pit shape and lunar phase is a judgment, not a measurement. The Mesolithic date is not questioned by anyone. The calendar reading has had a stranger reception. It has been cited widely and adopted by almost nobody. Specialist surveys of the British Mesolithic mention it in passing and decline to evaluate it. And the Scottish National Research Framework discusses the site without mentioning it at all. The excavators themselves were careful. People returned to those pits for 4,000 years, they wrote, but that need not mean the monument was used or understood the same way. Who watched the sky there, they added, we cannot yet tell. The field is under crop again. 12 pits in an arc, refilled, invisible from the ground, aimed at a gap in a hill where the shortest day still comes up. Number 12. The fort that was not a fort. In the Casma Valley, on the north coast of Peru, about 400 kilometers from Lima, a low ridge carries 13 blocks of stone and mortar in a line running north to south. They stand between 2 and 6 meters high, and the spaces between them are narrow and almost identical, between 4.7 and 5.1 meters. Each has a stairway on its north side and another on its south. From a distance, the ridge looks serrated, like a saw blade laid along the skyline. The complex around them is called Chanquillo. On a hill to the southwest sits a walled structure with 3 concentric ring walls and gateways that turn back on themselves. And for most of the time, archaeologists have known the site that structure defined it. Chanquillo was a fort. The towers were something else unexplained on a ridge nearby. In March 2007, Ivan Gezi and Clive Ruggles published a paper in Science that reassigned the whole site. They had located 2 observing positions. One lies 235 meters west of the tower line, inside a building reached by a corridor 2.4 meters wide between walls 2.2 meters high, ending at an opening with no door. Ritual offerings of pottery, marine shell, and worked stone were recovered at that spot. The other position mirrors it to the east, at the same elevation and the same distance. From the western point, the June solstice sun rises just to the left of the northernmost tower. Over the following months, the sunrise walks south along the ridge, appearing in one gap, then the next, until in December it comes up behind the southernmost tower. Then it turns around and walks back. From the eastern point, the same span is traced in sunsets, running the other way. The sun rises in each gap for only a day or two. An observer standing in the corridor could fix any date in the year to within about a day. The whole solar year, from end to end, built as architecture. Chanquillo is one of only 2 places known in the ancient world with a complete solar horizon calendar, and the only one where the instrument survives at monumental scale. Still functional. It was inscribed as a World Heritage Site in 2021. The towers were built and used in the last few centuries BC, with the main occupation around 250 to 200 BC. What makes this significant is not the precision. It is what was happening around it. Chanquillo went up after the collapse of the Chavín religious system, in a period of fragmentation and endemic warfare along the Peruvian coast. Ceramic figurines from the site show pairs of warriors in single combat, with spear throwers, darts, maces and shields, and fragments of warrior vessels were found at the entrance to the observatory, apparently smashed on purpose. The walled hilltop was not a fort guarding a calendar. It was a temple that needed walls in a century when temples were targets. Around 100 BC, the complex was partly destroyed and abandoned. It was never reoccupied. The people who built it had no writing. We do not know what they called themselves, what language they spoke, or what they called the towers. The instrument they left still measures the year to the day on a ridge in a desert valley for nobody. Number 11. The Coligny calendar. A sheet of bronze, 1 meter 48 wide and 90 centimeters high, engraved edge to edge with columns of text, and pierced across its whole surface with hundreds of small holes. It came out of a field called La Verpillière, near the village of Coligny in eastern France in 1897 during agricultural work, along with about 400 pieces of a life-size bronze statue of a young man holding a spear. The plate itself was shattered. 73 fragments survive, roughly half the original. It is the longest known document in the Gaulish language, containing on the order of 600 distinct words, written in Latin capitals and Roman numerals. It is a calendar, and it runs for 5 years at a time. 16 columns lay out 62 lunar months. Each month has 29 or 30 days, and each is split in half by the word atanu, the returning night. Between the day entries, there is a small hole for every day, one after another, all the way through. A peg was moved along, one hole at a time, to mark where in the 62 months you currently stood. 60 lunar months, plus 2 intercalary months, inserted at intervals of 2.5 years, brings the moon and the sun back into agreement. The exact total is disputed, and turns on the contested length of a single month called equus, but it lands close to 1,830 days. Every month carries one of 2 labels, imat or ANM. These are usually translated as good and not good on the strength of Celtic cognates, and that reading has generated a great deal of writing about Druidic almanacs of lucky and unlucky days. The tablet does not support it. Mat falls on the 30-day months, and ANM on the 29-day months, with a single exception, which suggests the words may simply mean full and lacking, and they label months, not days. The word druid appears nowhere on the object. The detail that changes the story is in the engraving itself. The text contains copying errors of a kind that indicate the engraver was reproducing an inherited document he did not fully understand. The tablet is Roman period, most often dated to the late 2nd century AD. The system it records is older than the bronze it is cut into. That matters because of what Rome had already done. Augustus barred Roman citizens from Druidic rites. Tiberius moved against the Gallic seers by decree of the Senate. Suetonius says Claudius abolished the religion outright, and in AD 60 or 61, a Roman army destroyed the sacred groves on Anglesey. And then, more than a century after all of that, somebody in eastern Gaul cast a bronze plate 1.5 meters wide and engraved on it a native lunar calendar in the Gaulish language, using the alphabet of the empire that had banned the priesthood the calendar belonged to. Gaulish itself lasted a few centuries more. A Roman jurist in the 3rd century notes that legal trusts could still be composed in it. Around 474, Sidonius Apollinaris congratulates the nobles of the Auvergne on having resolved to give it up. After that, the attestations run out. The bronze is in the Lugdunum Museum in Lyon, mounted flat behind glass, its fragments held in a grid with the gaps left visible. 8 small pieces of a nearly identical calendar were found at a sanctuary at Villards de Heria in the Jura, and are held in Lons-le-Saunier. Between them, they preserve the timekeeping of a civilization whose language nobody has spoken for 1,500 years. Number 10. The light that stopped falling. In 1977, Anna Sofer was volunteering on a rock art recording survey in Chaco Canyon in northwestern New Mexico. She climbed Fajada Butte, a sandstone tower rising 135 meters from the canyon floor, and near the summit, found 2 spiral petroglyphs pecked into a cliff face, standing behind 3 large slabs of rock that leaned against it. She came back close to the summer solstice, near the middle of the day. A narrow blade of sunlight came through the gap between 2 of the slabs and passed down through the exact center of the larger spiral. The larger spiral measures 34 by 41 centimeters and has 9.5 turns. The slabs are each 2 to 3 meters tall and weigh around 2,000 kilograms. Sofer Volker Zinsser and Rolf Sinclair published the site in Science in 1979, describing 3 configurations. At summer solstice, a single dagger of light bisects the large spiral, lasting about 18 minutes. At the equinoxes, a smaller dagger crosses the center of the small spiral. At a winter solstice, 2 shafts of light frame the large spiral on either side for 3 hours or more. The claim generated immediate argument. In 1982, Edwin Newman, Robert Mark, and Gwen Vivian published a response in the same journal arguing that 3 slabs of that mass on a cliff ledge are a natural rockfall, not a construction. Michael Zilek, an astronomer at the University of New Mexico, published a skeptical reassessment questioning both the precision claimed and the plausibility of a device like this. Pueblo sun watching, as documented, is done from fixed stations on the ground, against the horizon. A ledge near the top of a butte is a difficult place to keep an agricultural calendar. A further claim that shadow edges on the same spiral mark the 18.6-year cycle in which the moon's rising point swings to its extremes, rests on a shadow rather than a beam, and remains the weakest part of the case. The middle position most people now hold is that the slabs fell there on their own, and that somebody found the light and carved the spirals to mark it. The petroglyphs cannot be directly dated. Then, in the summer of 1989, monitoring found that 2 of the 3 slabs had moved. The summer solstice form was measurably wrong. The blade of light had thickened, and it no longer passed through the center. The winter and equinox patterns were severely altered. The cause was not weather. It was erosion, accelerated by people, boot soles grinding soft sandstone. The vegetation trampled off paths worn into fragile soil at the base of the slabs in the 12 years since the site became famous. The National Park Service had already closed the butte to the public in 1982. After the slabs moved, a retaining wall was built around their base, and the ground stabilized. Nothing was pushed back. The risk of causing further damage was judged too high. The wider landscape has its own ending. Chaco's great houses were built between about 850 and 1150. Construction in the canyon stops around 1130, at the onset of a drought that runs to 1180, and includes 23 consecutive years of below normal moisture. People moved north, and later out. They did not vanish. Their descendants are the Pueblo communities of the Southwest, who are clear that Chaco was migrated from, not abandoned. Fajada Butte is closed. The site is visited once a year for monitoring. The only place the dagger still falls through the center of the spiral is inside a computer model, built from measurements taken before 1989. Number 9. The stone that counted the ends of worlds. On the 17th of December, 1790, workmen repaving the main square of Mexico City struck stone about 40 centimeters down, some 60 meters west of the Viceregal Palace. They uncovered a basalt disc 3.5 meters across, weighing roughly 24 tons, lying face down. Face down is the first fact. It had been moved there and buried deliberately, carving hidden, at some point after the Spanish took the city in 1521. It was the second such find that year. In August, workers digging a water conduit in the same square had brought up the colossal statue of Coatlicue, and the university authorities had it reburied in a patio, out of a concern that people would begin worshiping it again. The disc was treated differently. In July 1791, it was mounted against the base of the west tower of the cathedral, in the open, facing the square, where it stayed for 94 years. The antiquarian Antonio de Leon y Gama published a study of both objects in 1792, and his engraving of the disc shaped European understanding of it for most of a century. The stone is now called the Piedra del Sol, and the popular name for it in English is the Aztec calendar. It is not a calendar. Nothing on it can be operated, advanced, or read off to give a date. What it carries is a cosmology. At the center is a face, surrounded by the glyph Nahui Olin, for movement, the name of the present world. Around that face, in 4 square panels, are the 4 worlds that came before, each named for the day it ended. 4 Jaguar, which ran 676 years and ended with humanity devoured. 4 Wind, 364 years, ended by hurricanes. 4 Rain, 312 years, ended by fire falling from the sky. 4 Water, 676 years, ended by flood. Every one of those durations is a multiple of 52. Beyond them runs a ring of the 20-day signs of the 260-day ritual count, and beyond that, 2 fire serpents meeting at the bottom, and the date, 13 Reed, which falls in 1479. What makes this difficult is that we cannot agree on the face. Edward Seller read it as the sun, Tonatiuh, and said so flatly. Carlos Navarrete and Doris Hayden argued in 1974 that the clawed hands gripping human hearts and the flint knife for a tongue are the attributes of the Earth Lord Tlaltecutli, not of the sun. Cecilia Klein proposed the Lord of the Night. In 2016, David Stewart argued that the face is Moctezuma II, fused with Huitzilopochtli, pointing to a royal headdress glyph directly above the movement sign. 4 serious scholars, 4 different identifications on the most reproduced object in Mexican archaeology. There is one thing about the stone that almost nobody notices, and it is visible on the object. Along the upper and left edges, blocks of rock stand proud of the finished surface, uncarved. The monument was never completed. It was probably never formally dedicated. The 5th world, the one the stone was carved in, was to end in earthquakes. In 1885, the disc was taken off the cathedral wall and moved to the National Museum. In 1964, it was moved again to the hall it occupies, now in Chapultepec Park, where it stands upright behind a barrier, though it was carved to lie flat. 24 tons of basalt, hauled 22 kilometers from a lava flow, carved with the destruction of 4 worlds and the name of the 5th, and abandoned before the last edges were finished. Number 8. The year that would not stay still. The Egyptian civil calendar had 3 seasons of 4 months each. Akhet was inundation, when the Nile flooded. Pere was the emergence, when the water fell back and the fields were planted. Shamu was low water, the harvest. 12 months of 30 days, plus 5 days added at the end, and the year came to 365 exactly. It is in use with certainty by the middle of the 25th century BC, and it is the direct ancestor of the year on every wall in the modern world. It had no leap day. A tropical year is about a quarter of a day longer than 365. Without correction, a calendar loses 1 day every 4 years, a month every 120, and a whole season in about 365 years. Within a few centuries of its introduction, the Egyptian month called inundation was falling in what we would call spring, then winter. The season names went on, meaning nothing at all, and were used anyway. Egypt ran that calendar for something close to 3,000 years. They were not unaware of it. In March of 238 BC, a synod of Egyptian priests met at Canopus in the Delta and issued a decree in hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek. The text states plainly that the year as arranged is defective, that it falls short by a quarter of a day, and that the festival of the star, Sothis, moves to a different day every 4 years. The remedy legislated is a 6th added day every 4th year in honor of the reigning king and queen. That is the first leap year rule in recorded history, 192 years before Julius Caesar. There is no evidence anyone used it. The wandering year continued unchanged. But here's where the story changes. The drift is not an error if you are not trying to track the seasons. A year of exactly 365 days, with no intercalation, is the only calendar in the ancient world in which the interval between any 2 dates can be calculated by subtraction. No leap years to check, no priest to consult, for an administration collecting taxes, scheduling rations, and dating contracts across a country 1,000 kilometers long. That is worth more than knowing when the river will rise, which anybody could see. The drift completes a full circuit in 1460 years. In AD 238, a Roman writer named Censorinus recorded that the Egyptian New Year had fallen on the 21st of July a century earlier, which was, he says, the customary time of the rising of the dog star. Modern computation puts the actual rising of Sirius at Memphis on the 20th of July that year, one day off. Censorinus is essentially our only ancient source for the coincidence, and the 1460-year cycle everyone now calls the Sothic cycle is something we can calculate. No Egyptian text names it. There is no evidence that anyone in Egypt knew they were inside one. Two documents carry almost the entire weight of Egyptian chronology before the first millennium BC, and both are notices of that star rising. A letter from the temple archive at Illahun, and a note on the back of a medical papyrus. Depending on where you assume the observation was made, the same letter dates the reign of Senusret III to 1872 BC, or 1866, or 1830. That gap runs through everything after it. In 46 BC, Caesar reformed the Roman year using the length of the Egyptian one, with a day added every fourth year. Pliny says he employed an expert named Sosigenes and tells us nothing else about him. That year ran 445 days to absorb the correction. The calendar you use to schedule next week descends from a year that ran uncorrected, out of step with its own seasons, for 3,000 years, in a country whose priests knew and did not care. Number 7. The Antikythera mechanism. Around Easter 1900, a crew of sponge divers from the island of Simi took shelter from weather off Antikythera, a rock between Crete and the Peloponnese. Elias Stadiatis went down about 45 meters and came up in distress, describing bodies on the seabed. The captain, Demetrios Kontos, dived himself and brought up a bronze arm. The salvage that followed ran through the winter of 1900 and into the summer of 1901, with the Greek navy assisting. It brought up statues, glass, and coins. One diver died, and 2 were paralyzed by decompression. The material went to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and the statuary took the attention. On the 17th of May, 1902, an archaeologist at the museum named Valerios Stais was looking at a corroded lump of bronze and saw, in the surface of it, the teeth of a gear. 82 fragments survive. 30 gears are visible in them. What the object was became clear only in stages, across a century. Gamma radiography by Derek DeSola Price of Yale, published in 1974. Then, in 2006 and 2008, a research program using microfocus computed tomography that doubled the amount of legible text and resolved the back of the machine. The front carried a ring of the Egyptian 365-day year, a zodiac ring, pointers for the sun and moon, and a small ball, half silver and half black, that rotated to show the phase of the moon. The gearing driving the moon includes a pin riding in a slot, which makes the moon speed up and slow down through its orbit, a mechanical version of the lunar theory associated with Hipparchus. The back has 2 spirals. The upper one runs 5 turns, 47 cells each, 235 lunar months, 19 years, the cycle after which the moon returns to the same phase on the same date. Beside it, a small dial for the 4-year cycle of the games, marked with Olympia, Nemea, Isthmia, Pythia, and 2 more. The lower spiral runs 4 turns and 223 months. That is the interval after which eclipses repeat, 18 years and 11 days and 8 hours. And the spiral carries glyphs marking which months contain a solar or lunar eclipse. The detail that settles the question about this machine is the small dial set inside that spiral. It is divided into 3 sectors. One is blank. The second carries the Greek numeral for 8, the third the numeral for 16. 223 months is not a whole number of days. It overruns by about 8 hours, which means the repeating eclipse arrives 8 hours later in the day each time, and the Earth has turned a third of the way further round. The dial tells you to add 8 hours, then 16, then to start again. This is not a device for knowing that an eclipse is coming. It is a device for knowing what time of day it will happen, 3 cycles out. The ship went down between about 70 and 60 BC. The machine may be older than the ship by decades. Proposals for its design date run from 205 BC to the second half of the 2nd century. A study published in 2024, using statistical methods developed for gravitational wave detection, reanalyzed the surviving holes in the front calendar ring and concluded there were 354 of them rather than 365, and measured the ring's radius to 1/3 of a millimeter. Nothing of comparable complexity survives for a very long time afterwards. The next geared object we have is a small Byzantine sundial calendar with 8 wheels, 5 centuries later. Al-Biruni describes a geared calendar device around the year 1000, and a geared astrolabe made in Isfahan in 1221 is the oldest complete geared machine surviving anywhere. The technique did not disappear. The ambition did. The fragments are in Athens, in a case, greenish and flat and broken, with the tooth counts still countable in the X-rays. The machine could tell you the hour of an eclipse 54 years ahead. Nobody on board could tell that the ship was going to sink. Number 6. The almanac nobody else was permitted to print. In Imperial China, the calendar was not a public utility. It was a possession of the throne. The term is zhengshuo, the first month and the first day, meaning the calendar issued by a dynasty's founder. To receive the zhengshuo was to acknowledge the emperor. Tributary states accepted it as the formal token of submission, and issuing your own was an act of rebellion. Printing an unauthorized almanac was a criminal offense under several dynasties. Behind that sat the mandate of heaven. A dynasty ruled with cosmic sanction, and that sanction was legible in the sky. Eclipses, comets, and anomalies were read as commentary on the conduct of the state. A calendar that failed to predict an eclipse was therefore not a technical embarrassment. It was public evidence that the alignment between the throne and heaven had slipped. In 104 BC, Emperor Wu of Han replaced the calendar inherited from the Qin. The reform is called Taichu, Grand Inception. Sima Qian, then the court's grand astrologer, and later the author of the first great Chinese history, was among those who petitioned for it. The technical work is credited to Deng Ping and to Luoxia Hong, a builder of armillary spheres. The change moved the start of the year from the 10th month to the 1st, putting the civil year back in step with the agricultural one. That is where the Chinese New Year still sits. To make the transition, the year 104 BC was given 15 months. Then there is the part of the system that has no European equivalent. Chinese mathematical astronomy, from the Han onward, computed everything backwards from a hypothetical moment called the Shangyuan, the Grand Origin, an instant, unimaginably far in the past, at which every cycle began together. New moon, winter solstice, midnight, and the first day of the 60-day count, all coinciding, with the planets at a common starting point. Around 7 BC, the scholar Liu Xin built a system on a period of 1,539 years, after which new moon and solstice and midnight fall together again, and on 3 of those, after which the day count agrees as well. He named the 3 parts heaven, earth, and man. What makes this consequential is not the arithmetic. It is what the arithmetic was for. Anchoring the calendar to an origin tens of millions of years back made the current dynasty's new year the demonstrable continuation of an order that began with time itself. It is political theology, written as long division. The grand origin lasted more than 1,000 years. Guo Shoujing threw it out. Working for Kublai Khan, with observations from 27 stations across the empire, and a gnomon 12 meters high, fitted with a pinhole device. To sharpen the shadow's edge, he produced the season-granting calendar of 1281. Its year length matches the figure the Gregorian reform would adopt 3 centuries later. And it took its epoch not from the origin of time, but from a winter solstice somebody had actually watched. The political stakes never went away. In 1664, a polemicist named Yang Guangxian brought charges against Johann Adam Schall von Bell, the Jesuit who had headed the Imperial Astronomical Bureau since the Qing took Beijing. The accusation that carried was not astronomical. It was that Schall had chosen an inauspicious burial date for an infant son of an imperial consort. In April 1665, Schall and 7 Chinese assistants of the Bureau were sentenced to death. Schall, by then paralyzed by a stroke and unable to speak for himself, was pardoned. 5 of the Chinese astronomers were executed. 4 years later, the young Kangxi Emperor, ruling in his own right, ordered a public test. The Jesuit Ferdinand Verbiest predicted the length of a gnomон's shadow correctly, and Yang's bureau did not. The verdict was reversed. Schall's honors restored posthumously, and Yang sentenced to exile, dying on the road home in 1669. The Chinese calendar was revised on the order of 100 times across 2 millennia, and several dozen versions were officially promulgated. Every one of them was an assertion about who had the right to say what day it was. Number 5. The Age, with 400,000 years left to run. There is a moment in Indian astronomy from which everything is counted. It is placed at the meeting of midnight and sunrise between the 17th and 18th of February, 3102 BC, on a meridian running through the city of Ujjain in central India. At that instant, the system holds. The sun, the moon, and the planets all stood together at 0 longitude. Nobody observed it. It is a computed origin, back-calculated from planetary motions, and there are 2 schools on the exact instant, one placing it at midnight over Ujjain, the other at sunrise on the equator on a Friday. The astronomer Aryabhata used one convention in one of his books and the other in the next. What began at that moment is the Kali Yuga, the 4th and last age of the current cycle, and the one we are still in. The scheme runs like this. 4 ages make a Mahayuga. The first Krita lasts 1,728,000 years. Treta lasts 1,296,000. Dvapara, 864,000. Kali, 432,000. The proportions are 4, 3, 2, 1, and the whole comes to 4,320,000 years. 1,000 of those makes 1 day of Brahma, 4.32 billion years, which happens to be roughly the age of the Earth, and is a coincidence, not a discovery. The texts describe the ages as a decline, and the image they use is a bull. In the first age, the bull of Dharma stands on 4 legs. In the second, 3. In the third, 2. In the Kali Yuga, it stands on 1. Rulers tax without protecting. Lifespans shorten. Wealth alone confers status. Aryabhata, born in 476 and working at Kusumapura near modern Patna, wrote the Aryabhatya in 499. We know the year because he tells us when 3,600 years of the Kali Yuga had elapsed, he says he was 23. His value for the length of a sidereal day is 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4.1 seconds. The modern figure differs in the 3rd decimal. He also did something that gets less attention than it deserves. The scriptures give the 4 ages in the ratio 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. Aryabhata divided the great age into 4 equal quarters of 1,080,000 years each, because equal quarters make the planetary arithmetic clean. A mathematician overruling scripture for computational convenience in the 5th century, and stating it plainly. Later astronomers did not follow him. Then, the same number turns up somewhere else entirely. Around 280 BC, a Babylonian priest named Berossus wrote a history of his own country in Greek. The work is lost. It survives only in quotations inside quotations, passed through Alexander Polyhistor to Josephus, then to Eusebius, then to a Byzantine chronicler, 4 layers deep. In it, 10 kings reigned before the flood, for a combined total of 432,000 years. That is the length of the Kali Yuga, exactly. The Babylonian figure is built from a unit of 3,600, which is 60 cubed, and 432,000 is twice that, a natural number in a base 60 system and an awkward one in base 10. Its presence at the center of an Indian decimal cosmology has been argued about for 70 years. Bartel van der Verden and David Pingree both made the case for transmission along the channels that carried Greek astrology east. Others argue the number arose independently out of Vedic ritual arithmetic, and the actual Sumerian king lists on clay do not give the figure at all. The best known of them, a prism in Oxford, has 8 kings and 241,200 years. Only Berossus matches. The coincidence has never been resolved. What the Indian scheme does that no other calendar on this list does is state the remaining time. The Kali Yuga began in 3102 BC and runs 432,000 years. Its projected end falls somewhere around the year 428,800. Every other doomsday reckoning in this video eventually came due. This one is a clock that will outlast the species that built it, running in the corner of a cosmology, with more than 99% of its interval still to go. Number 4. The night they put out every fire in Mexico. The Aztec calendar was 2 calendars turning against each other. One was a ritual count of 260 days, made of 20-day signs running against 13 numbers. The other was a year of 365 days, 18 months of 20, with 5 left over. Any given combination of the two recurs after 18,980 days. That is 52 years, and it is the largest unit the system had. It had no way of distinguishing one 52-year round from the next. There was no equivalent of a year number counting up from a fixed point. Time came round and came round again, and the join between one round and the next was the most dangerous night there was. The ceremony is called the binding of the years. The account we have comes principally from the 7th book of the Florentine Codex, compiled by the Franciscan Bernardino de Sahagún from Nawa informants in the decades after the conquest. On the last 5 days of the 52-year round, household hearths were put out across the territory. Hearthstones were thrown away. Images of the gods were thrown into the water. Houses were swept out completely. Everything that could hold a flame was extinguished, everywhere, at once. Pregnant women were shut inside granaries, their faces covered with maguey leaves, because it was believed that if the sun failed, they would turn into the tsitsimime, the star demons that would come down and devour what was left of humanity. Children were masked as well, and kept awake, prodded through the night, because a child who slept through it would turn into a mouse. The priests walked out of Tenochtitlan to a hill called Huixachtlan on the eastern edge of the lake, today, the Cerro de la Estrella in Iztapalapa. They watched a particular group of stars cross the meridian at midnight. The identification of that group is still argued. When the stars passed, a captive was laid out and opened, and the fire drill was worked in his chest cavity until it caught. His heart went into the flame. Then, runners took torches from that fire and carried them down off the hill to the temple precinct in the city, and from there to every temple, and from every temple to every house. And the world got another 52 years. What makes this harder to categorize is that it was not an imperial invention. Christina Elson and Michael Smith identified new fire deposits at Cuexcomate in Morelos and at sites in the basin of Mexico, and concluded that the ceremony was an old and widespread central Mexican rite the Aztec state took over and centralized. The chronicles say it was moved from one year sign to another by Moctezuma I after a catastrophic famine, though that account is court history and cannot be independently checked. Catherine de Cicere has argued that the hill used for the last ceremony was chosen because the Mexica had been defeated there generations earlier, which would make the procession a deliberate reversal of an old humiliation. The last binding of the years was performed in 1507 under Moctezuma II. It is painted in the Codex Borbonicus, and the final page of that manuscript counts the 52 years forward from it. The next one was due in 1558. Cortés landed in 1519. Tenochtitlan fell on the 13th of August, 1521. There are traces of people still counting. The manuscript known as the Leyenda de los Soles carries the date of the 22nd of May, 1558. In the same year, a Nahua prophet named Juan Teton was preaching in the Toluca Valley about what was coming when the years were bound. And the Archbishop of Mexico is reported to have had the Great Sunstone buried, face down in the plaza, shortly before that year. The Aztecs marked the completion of each round by carving a stone in the shape of a bundle of sticks, tied in the middle. They are called Xumilpili, year bundles. At least 8 complete Aztec examples are known. 2 were dug up by Leopoldo Batres in 1900 in a street beside the Templo Mayor precinct, lying on an altar that appears to have existed for that purpose, a place for the burial of expired time. One in the National Museum is about 60 centimeters long, carved in stone, in the shape of something that would ordinarily be made of reeds and thrown away. They are the receipts. Every one of them records a 52-year round that ended and was survived. The bundle for 1558 was never carved. Number 3, the sky written down every night for 600 years. In the British Museum, there are more than 1,200 fragments of clay from Babylon that constitute the longest continuous record of scientific observation ever made by anyone. The Babylonians called the practice Nasarusagine, regular watching. The tablets are known now as the astronomical diaries. Each covers half a year. The earliest is from 652 BC. The latest is from 61 BC. 6 centuries, month by month, night by night. What is on them is stranger than a list of star positions. A typical entry gives the position of the moon against reference stars, the visibility of the planets, any eclipse, the solstice or equinox if it fell in that month, and any meteor or comet. Then it gives the market rate for barley, dates, mustard, cress, sesame, and wool. Then the level of the Euphrates, rising or falling, and by how much. Then the weather. Then whatever happened. A war, an epidemic, the arrival of a king, a riot. The sky, the price of grain, the height of the river, and the news, on the same tablet, in the same hand, because the people writing them did not regard those as separate subjects. The standard edition was produced by Abraham Sachs and Hermann Hunger across 3 decades. Sachs died in 1983 with the work unfinished, and Hunger completed it, and the 4th volume was never published. Out of that record came prediction. Somewhere before 575 BC, Babylonian scholars established that lunar eclipses recur in a pattern with a period of 223 months. Within that span, there are exactly 38 points at which an eclipse is possible, 33 of them 6 months apart and 5 of them 5 months apart. And once you have the pattern, you can lay it out as a table and read forward off the end of it. The interval comes to 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. It is the same number of months engraved on the back of the Antikythera mechanism, 500 years later, and 1,000 miles west. The Babylonians had no name for it. They wrote 18 years. The word Saros was attached to it by Edmund Halley in the 1690s, taken from a Byzantine dictionary, where it means something else entirely. The sexagesimal unit of 3,600 that appears in Berossus's count of the kings before the flood. Then, the reason for all of it becomes visible. Eclipse omens were read against the king. A lunar eclipse in the wrong month, in the wrong quadrant of the sky, meant the death of the ruler of a named land. And because the eclipse could now be predicted, the response could be scheduled. The ritual is called Sarpuhi, the substitute king. When the omen was read as fatal, a man was taken, bathed, anointed, dressed in royal clothing, and placed on the throne. A woman was installed beside him as substitute queen. The omens were recited aloud in front of him to transfer them onto his person. The real king withdrew and was addressed, for the duration, as the farmer. After a period that could run to 100 days, the substitute was put to death. The danger was considered discharged, and he was buried with full royal honors. This is not a legend. It is documented in the correspondence of Assyrian court scholars. Esarhaddon, who ruled from 680 to 669 BC, is recorded as having performed it at least 7 times, once with substitutes enthroned in 2 cities at the same time, because the omen threatened 2 territories. One of them was named Damki, the son of the chief administrator of the temples of Babylon. He was executed together with the woman who had been installed as his queen. The astronomy was excellent. The predictions worked. The use they were put to was to calculate in advance the date on which a man would need to be killed. The diaries stop in 61 BC. Astronomical texts continue for another century and a half, produced by a shrinking number of temple scribes at Babylon and Uruk, in a script almost nobody could still read, in a language that had not been spoken on the street for centuries. The last cuneiform tablet anyone can date was dug up at Uruk in 1969 by a German expedition, lying near the surface. It is catalogued as W22340A. It is an almanac. Predicted positions of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, 2 eclipses, and the dates certain stars would first appear, for the second half of a year that corresponds to AD 79 and 80. 3,000 years of writing. The first system anyone invented for putting language into a durable object, and the last surviving thing written in it is a set of predictions about a year. Nobody who could read them lived to see. It sits in the National Museum of Iraq. Number 2, the calendar that did not end. In April and May of 2012, an archaeological team working at La Corona in the Payton Forest of northern Guatemala was excavating a stairway of carved blocks at the base of a building. Marcelo Canuto of Tulane University and Tomás Barrientos of the Universidad del Valle de Guatemala announced the find that June. One block carried 56 hieroglyphs, and among them a date. 13 Baktans, 4 Ajah, the 3rd of Kankin. That is the 21st of December 2012. They had dug it up in the same year. The Maya long count is a count of days from a fixed origin. 20 days make a winal. 18 winals, a ton of 360 days. 20 tons a kiatun. 20 kaatuns, a baktan, of 144,000 days, which is a little under 395 years. The origin sits on the 11th of August, 3114 BC, and the completion of the 13th Baktan falls on the 21st of December, 2012. In 2013, a team led by Douglas Kennett radiocarbon dated a carved wooden lintel from Tikal, bearing it its own long count date, and confirmed that the correlation between the 2 calendars is right. Only 2 texts from the ancient Maya world refer to that day. The other is a monument from Tortuguero in Tabasco, carved in the 7th century, whose subject is the dedication of a building in the year 69. The 13 Baktan date appears at the end, projected forward from the event the monument is actually about. David Stewart's translation of the closing passage reads that the 13th Baktun will be finished on 4 Ajah, and that something will occur, the descent of a deity called Bolon Yokte Ku. The glyphs after that are effaced. Whatever the sentence said, the stone no longer says it. Sven Gronemeyer and Barbara McLeod have argued the grammar makes the descent a genuine prediction about the future date. Stewart argues the text has already turned back to the 7th century. The disagreement is unresolved, and it is a disagreement about 2 damaged glyph blocks. The La Corona block is not ambiguous at all. Its subject is a king. Yuknum Yichak Ka'ak of Kalakmul had been defeated in battle by Tikal in 695, and the block records his arrival at La Corona a few months later, in early 696, still using his full titles, one of which styles him a lord of 13 Ketuns. The 13 Baktun date is invoked as an extension of that title, a defeated king reaching for the largest cycle available to him, to assert that his order would continue. What makes this worth stating clearly is what the Maya themselves wrote about time after 2012. At Palenque, the text inside the Temple of the Inscriptions runs the calendar forward to the 80th calendar round anniversary of the accession of the king Pakal, a date that falls in the year 4772. At Koba, a stela writes the creation date with 20 higher-order positions stacked above the familiar ones, all filled with 13s, describing an interval so long that the age of the universe does not approach it. 13 Baktuns was not a terminus. It was a round number in a system that had no terminus, and the classic Maya wrote as though the count would run indefinitely, because as far as they were concerned, it would. The ending, when it came, arrived 1100 years early, and was not on the calendar at all. In 2012, the same year the block came out of the ground at La Corona, Douglas Kennett and colleagues published a climate record from a stalagmite in Yokbalam Cave in southern Belize, dated to sub-annual resolution across 2,000 years, and set it against the dated monuments. From 440 to 660, the rainfall is high, and the number of Maya polities and inscriptions grows. From 660 to 1,000, it dries out progressively, and the record fills with warfare and with the collapse of one royal court after another. From 1020 to 1100, there is a severe extended drought. Work on lake sediments in the Yucatan has since put a figure on the worst of it. Rainfall down by around half, with peaks near 70%. The monuments stop. The last long count date carved on any Maya monument is at Tonina in Chiapas, and it corresponds to the year 909. What ended was the institution that commissioned inscriptions. Divine kingship stopped functioning, and the courts that had paid stonecutters to record their accessions in the long count stopped existing. Cities in the north went on. Millions of Maya people are alive today, speaking some 30 Mayan languages in the same landscape. The calendar was fine. It kept counting through 909, and through 1697, and through 2012, and it is counting now, in the 14th Baktun. The civilization that built it ran out of rain more than 1,000 years before the date. The rest of the world decided was the end of it. Number 1. The people who knew how long they had. In July of 44 BC, 4 months after the assassination of Julius Caesar, a comet appeared over Rome during games held in his honor. It was visible for 7 days. Its rising was recorded in China as well. The comet was quickly turned into propaganda. It was declared to be Caesar's soul ascending, and a star was added to his statue. There was one other interpretation offered in public, and we know about it because Augustus wrote it down in his own memoirs, and a commentator on Virgil quoted the passage 4 centuries later. A haruspex named Volcadius, a diviner trained in the Etruscan discipline, stood up in an assembly and said the comet meant something else. It marked the end of the 9th saeculum and the beginning of the 10th. And because he had disclosed that against the will of the gods, he would die immediately. He collapsed in the middle of the assembly before he had finished speaking. To understand what he had just announced, you need the system he was trained in. The Etruscans occupied central Italy before Rome and taught Rome much of its ritual technique. Their religious literature, which the Romans called the Etrusca Disciplina, included books on how to read lightning, how to read the organs of sacrificed animals, and how to read time. The last of these were the books of fate. A saeculum in that system is not a fixed 100 years. It is defined by human lives. It begins at the founding of a city, and it ends with the death of the last person born on the day of that founding, the longest life the founding generation produced. When that person died, the priests declared the saeculum over, and the ending was confirmed by portents. Censorinus, writing in AD 238, says he has this from Varro, who had it from the Tuscan histories, and that those histories were written during the 8th saeculum. He gives the lengths. The first 4 ran 100 years each. The 5th ran 123. The 6th and the 7th ran 119 each. The 8th was in progress when the histories were composed. And then Censorinus gives the number that makes this entry what it is. The Etruscan nation was allotted 10 saecula. When the 10th was finished, he writes, the name of the Etruscan people would come to an end. This is not a prophecy about the sky falling. It is a bounded claim by a civilization about its own duration, written down in its own religious literature, centuries before the date it pointed at. They believed they had 10 ages, and they kept count. Plutarch records an earlier moment. In 88 BC, a trumpet note came out of a clear sky over Rome, prolonged and shrill, and the Etruscan sages declared it marked the passage into a new age, with men of different habits coming into the world. That belongs to a related but separate doctrine, about 8 ages of humanity, rather than 10 ages of a nation. What it shows is that Romans were still consulting the Etruscan reading of time in the 1st century BC and finding it credible. Virgil wrote the 4th eclogue around 40 BC, 4 years after Volcatius fell down. Its opening line says the last age of the Cumean song has now arrived, and the great order of the ages is being born again. In 17 BC, Augustus staged the secular games, 4 days of sacrifice at the turn of May into June, with a hymn composed by Horace and sung by 27 boys and 27 girls, each with both parents living. The marble record of those games was dug out of the Campus Martius in 1890, and it names Horace as the composer. Rome was converting the Etruscan doctrine of endings into an imperial festival of renewal. What actually happened to the Etruscans has nothing dramatic about it at all. After the social war of 90 and 89 BC, Rome extended citizenship through Italy. Etruscan families became Roman families. Etruscan children learned Latin. Livy notes that Etruscan had once been widely taught to Roman boys, and that in his own time it was Greek instead. Inscriptions in Etruscan get shorter and then stop. The last of them fall around the turn of the millennium. The language was not banned. It was simply not used, and then it was not known. The Emperor Claudius, who had an Etruscan first wife and a scholar's temperament, wrote 20 books on Etruscan history in Greek and had them read publicly in the library at Alexandria. Every word is lost. In AD 47, he also went to the Senate to have the College of Haruspices formally revived, on the grounds that the oldest discipline in Italy was being neglected and would otherwise disappear. The last appearance of the discipline in the historical record is in AD 408, with Alaric's army outside Rome. A group of Etruscan diviners came forward and offered to do what they said their ancestors had done at the town of Narnia: call down thunder and lightning on the besiegers. The rites would only work, they said, if public sacrifices were restored and the Senate went up to the capital to perform them. The city prefect consulted the Bishop of Rome, who declined to permit public pagan ceremony, and nobody would take part. The diviners were dismissed. Rome bought Alaric off with 5,000 pounds of gold, and he came back and sacked the city 2 years later. We have something on the order of 10,000 Etruscan inscriptions. Almost all of them are short, and most are funerary: a name, a father's name, an age. We can pronounce every word of the language, and we understand a few hundred of them. The longest text that survives was found by accident, and it is a calendar. In 1848, a Croatian official named Mihajlo Baric bought an Egyptian mummy in Alexandria as a souvenir. It stood in his house in Vienna for years, and the linen wrappings carried writing that nobody could read. The mummy passed to his brother, and then, in 1867, to a museum in Zagreb. In 1892, a specialist in Coptic named Jakob Krall examined the strips, reassembled them, and identified the language. The wrappings were an Etruscan book, 12 columns, 230 lines, around 1,300 legible words, the only linen book to survive from the ancient world, cut into bandages and wound around the body of an Egyptian woman who had nothing to do with it. The linen dates to roughly 390 BC, give or take 45 years. Its content is a ritual calendar. Dates, deities, offerings, the sequence of ceremonies through a year. 2 of the dates can be read with certainty. One is the 18th of June. The other is the 24th of September. The rest of it is words we can say and cannot translate from a religion that told its own people, in writing, that they had 10 ages and no more, and then turned out to be right, not by catastrophe or comet, but because the children stopped learning the language. The book is in Zagreb, kept in a refrigerated room. It is the last calendar of a people who wrote down when they would end. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.